Right now we go live to Boston, Massachusetts with one of the best. I consider him a friend, David Amoyal, a columnist with Gianluca Di Marzio. And welcome, David, once again, my friend.
Great to be on, Antonio. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Pleasure's always mine because, my friend, you know this Azzurri team, you know Serie A, you follow these players. Let's talk about this important start, this important win under the new head coach of the Azzurri, Antonio Conte. What I noticed, and I'm sure a lot of people noticed out there, was hungry guys, fresh faces, and I also noticed a younger crew like Simone Zaza who wants to prove that he belongs. Let's talk about it.
Absolutely. I think you really introduced this well. You know, you talked about hunger, and I think, what really stood out to me about this game, aside from the performance, was Conte after the match talked about the fact that he wants players that have hunger over fame. And in Italian, it sounds really good because he said, I want players that have fame instead of famosi. So he talked about players that are hungry instead of being famous. And that was probably a shot at Balotelli, and he was trying to really draw a distinction with Simone Zaza, who pretty much replaced Balotelli, and Immobile, two younger players who have good work rate and are trying really hard for the Azzurri. So I think that really is the theme of what we're seeing with Conte with the Azzurri.
David, let's talk about a guy who I thought should have been in Brazil under Prandelli. He didn't take him. I understand that he didn't have a great season in England. He didn't get a lot of playing time. But to me, Giaccherini was a guy that we saw in the Confederations Cup, David, bring all sorts of great energy, all sorts of important situations he played in. And now under Conte, he brings him back, and he played a solid game the first time away from the national team. Talk about Giaccherini.
Well, I wasn't too surprised that Conte went to players that were familiar with his system. He didn't have much time to get the players acclimated to the way he does things, so he called a lot of players that he knew well and that knew him. Giaccherini definitely is one of them. He coached him at Juve. He was one of his favorite players just because of the way he goes about business. He works hard, gives you all he has on the pitch. So it didn't surprise me that Conte went right back to him. I was surprised he used him kind of in a central role on the pitch instead of on the wing, but I think it really paid off. I think we showed Giaccherini playing the role that Marchisio played for Conte at Juve, and he did that very well. So I think we're going to see a lot of Giaccherini under Conte with the Azzurri. I'm not sure if he's going to be a full-time starter once Pirlo is back, and he'll probably alternate Pirlo, Verratti, and De Rossi. You'll see 2 out of 3 of those guys. But I think Giaccherini is definitely going to be a player that you're going to see a lot of on the Azzurri moving forward.
David, you got to convince me on this player. He had a great game yesterday. I was shocked, but I'm still not sold on Andrea Ranocchia. Here's a guy that I still don't believe in that could get the job done for this national team, especially in that important position that he plays. It convinced me why you think that this guy is a mainstay under Conte, or not.
Well, I go back to the fact that Conte brought in players that are familiar with his system. Ranocchia played for him at Bari. He's a player that Conte wanted to bring at Juve multiple times. He's a player that knows Bonucci really well. I think it made sense to bring in Ranocchia because both Barzagli and Chiellini were hurt, so he needed to replace both of them. So it made sense that he would bring in someone that knows the system, someone that knows Bonucci, and who's familiar with that 3 center-back defense. So I'm not sure if Ranocchia is going to be a starter once Barzagli and Chiellini are back, but I do think he's going to be part of the team. Just like you, I was very skeptical of Ranocchia, but I think in the second half of last season, he was really good for Inter. He went from being frozen out towards the end of 2013, and he was supposed to go to Galatasaray in Turkey, and then he ended up staying at Inter, and once Juan Jesus got hurt, he was starting regularly, and I thought he was one of the best defenders in Serie A in the second half of the season. But just like you, I'm surprised. I feel like Ranocchia is one of those players that people put in a category as a bust, and he's not very good, but I have to give him credit. I thought he played well for Inter. So let's see if he can keep playing this way for the Azzurri. I don't think he'll be a starter, but I think you'll definitely see him in the rotation with Conte.
Two guys that I think might possibly get a strong look at being starters. One, I believe, that should have that long look would be Destro and possibly Florenzi. But to me, Destro, David, I think this young man has been dealt a real raw card, especially under Prandelli. And I think this guy is, if he's healthy, can really put the ball in the back of the net. We saw it last season. He understands how to play in different situations as well.
I'm a big fan of Destro. You know, he kind of reminds me a little bit of Inzaghi. He's a great poacher. He's at the right place at the right time. Now, I don't know if he's as much as a Conte-type striker, say Zaza, who participates a lot in the action, helps out the defense. Now, Conte did use him. He did bring him in the second half, so obviously he believes in him. But I think, you know, Destro is going to have to show that he can kind of fit in as a striker in the Conte system. Conte likes strikers that can help out the defense and participate in the action. Destro isn't asked to do that as much as Roma, but I'm sure he could probably do it under Conte. I do think there's a lot of strikers, though, that with Italy that are going to be interesting. I think El Shaarawy is going to be a great player under Conte because he has all those characteristics that I described. So I'm very excited to see what's going to happen in the front line with the Azzurri. Just like you, I do rate Destro, and I think he's going to be in the rotation as well. But there are some good choices. But I do think for Balotelli, it's going to be very tough to get back in the mix when you look at all these other options and how he fits in with what Conte wants to do.
And another option, David, is Berardi. I think this young man is still on the rise. He's got a lot more to learn, but I think he is a guy that belongs on this national team once he gets in full form. And another guy I've been asked about all day, yesterday and today, is Marco Verratti. Where is his situation?
Well, let's start with Berardi. I think he's a very interesting player. It's important to know that when Conte was still at Juve this summer, before he decided to leave the team, he really wanted to bring back Berardi to Juve. He's co-owned with Sassuolo. Berardi wanted to stay at Sassuolo because he wanted to play regularly, despite the fact that Juve wanted to bring him right back. So we do know that Conte likes him. I see him more as a winger in like a 4-3-3 formation, and I think Conte will try that at some point. So I think he's a very interesting player in that sense. I'm personally a little bit disappointed that Conte isn't using Verratti. I thought especially with Pirlo being hurt, it would have made a lot of sense to just play him in front of the defense in that regista role that Pirlo does so well. And Verratti has been pegged as the heir apparent to Pirlo for quite some time. But Conte decided to go with De Rossi in that role, and he's done it pretty well. I personally would love to see Pirlo, Verratti, and De Rossi play together. We saw that a little bit in the World Cup, and that worked really well. I think that's really the best formation for the midfield for the Azzurri. But Conte was pretty clear that he only sees 2 out of 3 of those guys starting. I think you'll see Marchisio playing a lot, and Conte does rate Florenzi on Roma a lot. But I think depth is very important. You never know what's going to happen with injuries. It's better to have too many players than too little. And I think in that role, Italy is pretty stacked right now.
David, let's talk about it. It's out there since the first day that Conte got hired. I mean, I talk about it a little bit. I'm not sold on it, but you know, and I know that a lot of people are going to start saying, well, Conte, the Juve connection, a big block of Juve players, and that's fine. I mean, you have to build that foundation from the block that he feels comfortable with and the block that he has confidence in. That's fine, but I think, you know, he can't be going to the well too often because then people are going to start saying, look, this is basically a Juventus national team, and other players that are really on the rise from other clubs aren't going to get that serious look. Do you subscribe to that? Because I kind of subscribe to it a bit, not a lot, but a bit at the beginning I do subscribe to it.
Well, I go back to the fact that I'm not surprised that Conte wanted to start off with players that knew him and knew his system. And I think it's also important that you have players on the team that are familiar with Conte that can teach the others. That is something that we heard from a couple of the non-Juve players. They said right off the bat, you know, it's helpful to have these guys that can help us get to know what Conte is expecting from us. I do think you're going to see maybe a little bit more rotation of guys down the road, but also you're going to see some Juve players coming back. Pirlo's hurt right now. He was thinking about quitting the national team, but once Conte came on board right away, I knew he was coming back, and he'll be part of the national team. So you'll have him back. Marchisio was suspended for this match, and he'll definitely be part of the rotation. So those are two guys. He did start Florenzi against Norway, and I think you'll still see him with the team. You're going to see Giaccherini, who, is still kind of a Juve block guy, although he plays in the EPL. But I think, Conte has shown that he goes with players on the best form, players that show him in practice that they can do it. So I think the players from the other clubs are going to have opportunities to show Conte what they can do. Conte has already made a point of going to a lot of the training facilities of the other teams in Serie A. So I think if they impress him there, they'll be selected. So I think Conte, if anything, in his career, he has shown that he really doesn't look too much at the name in the back of the jersey. He looks at who can help him win the most. So I'm very curious to see what he does. Also, historically, the best Italian teams have been built on the Juve block. So it'll be interesting to see how he juggles that.
David, what was nice to watch yesterday was the emotion from Conte after the goals. Was the engaging and not sitting still, the motionless that we saw from Prandelli and others in the past. What I have been told from a colleague of mine in Rome that he knows Conte quite well, he has told me, Anthony, this guy is a student of the game. He will study, he will talk to players, he will talk to coaches, he will dig deep, he'll turn every stone to find the right mix of players to bring a championship squad to Italy. Is this the reason why you believe that Conte wanted to take this job on as well? Because he knew it was a massive job and he wanted this challenge, because with Juve, obviously, they didn't buy the players he wanted, and the challenges were gone from there.
It's a very interesting discussion what happened with Conte at Juve. I'm not so sure, the lack of the players being brought in was the main reason. I do think he felt a little bit burnt out. I also do think Conte felt he took Juve as far as he could. I think after winning 3 Scudetti in a row, he knew the focus was going to be on the Champions League. And maybe deep down he felt, for whatever reason, he couldn't bring Juve deep into the Champions League. I think, in that tournament, a lot of it has to do with the draw. I think Conte likes things that he can control. And in the league, in a long, 38-match league, he can control that a lot. In the Champions League, not so much. So I personally think it had more to do with that. I also think he was very burnt out from Juve. Conte is definitely a very intense man. He wanted to quit in May after winning the Scudetto. I think, Andrea Agnelli, the president of Juve, is very close to him. He talked him into, say, go on vacation, recharge your batteries, come back, and everything will be fine. Conte tried that, and when he came back, he just saw he didn't have it anymore. I personally was surprised he went for the national team. I think Conte likes having a lot of matches to play. I think in an ideal world, had there been a great club abroad with a lot of money that offered him a job, that's probably where he would have gone. But the Azzurri job worked out well for him. I think it's a great victory for the Italian Federation to hire Conte. You look at all the bad press when they elected Tavecchio as the president of the federation, and bringing in Conte changed the subject of that right away. And I think Tavecchio deserves a lot of credit for hiring Conte, who clearly is the best man for the job. So I'm curious to see how Conte handles this job. Right now he had the team, he was with them. Let's see if I suspect he might get bored, when there's no games for him to coach. So I'm very curious to see how this whole thing plays out. But so far, so good, that's for sure.
David, let me ask you this before we let you go. A couple of weeks ago, I had a conversation with a youth academy coach that was here in Toronto from AC Milan, and we talked about all sorts of things. And we talked about the youth systems in Italy. We talked about the young Italian player having a desire to play for Serie A clubs and for the national team. And you'd be shocked and surprised, and maybe you aren't, maybe you already know this, but a lot of young youth Italian players no longer in a lot of situations do not desire to play for the big clubs like Juve, Milan, Inter, Roma. We could go on and on. Napoli. They desire to go to play for Man U, Real. These other clubs, to me, when I was talking to this youth coach here in Toronto, looking at a few players, I was saddened to hear that, because as a youngster myself here in Canada growing up, I always wanted to play for Roma. I'll never forget having my Bruno Conte jersey on. Maybe you're too young to remember, David.
Oh, I remember, amigo.
But Bruno Conte, to me, was the player that I wanted to become and go in Italy and play like.
I definitely agree, but, I think that has to do with the decline of Serie A as a whole. You and I are old enough to remember the heyday, the mid-'80s when Maradona, Platini were there, and Serie A was a great league, in those times. In the 90s, there was a little bit of a dip in the mid-90s, and then Serie A came back. But, about 10 years ago, I feel like, when Calciopoli happened and Juve was relegated, that really was the beginning of the decline of Serie A. So, young players come up, they see the great TV coverage of teams abroad. EPL does such a great job of marketing their league. A lot of players want to go play in the EPL. Of course, you have Real Madrid, clubs like that. We saw PSG, who's been shopping in Italy so much, bringing so many players from there. I mean, when I was growing up, the idea of Marco Verratti wanting to leave Italy to go play for PSG was simply unthinkable. But we live in a different world now, especially with the salaries. You look at how much players can make abroad. And Serie A, unfortunately, they don't value young players as much as they should. We see so many, older players from other leagues coming to Serie A. Sometimes it's just a favor to an agent. One last contract for your client, come to Italy, be a free transfer, we'll give you good wages. So it's just a different ballgame. Unfortunately, Serie A isn't what it used to be. I do hope they try to bring it back to what it was, but, unfortunately, I can understand why some players don't romanticize it the way you and I do.
Yeah, it's sad. Gone are the days of Boniak, Platini, Baggio. We could go on and on and on. It's sad because those were the heydays when Serie A was on top of it all. Right now, a guy that's on top of it all, the king of kings in transfer news, Gianluca Di Marzio. Talk a little bit about him, David, as we close it out, and all the great work you're doing on his site as well.
Well, first off, I want to thank, we have so many great readers and followers in Canada. I know I can speak for Gianluca as well. We're really grateful for all the support we get from Canada and a lot of your listeners. Our English page has really grown. There's few things in my life that I was more certain of than bringing the transfer news that Gianluca does in English being a big success. What I like about what he does, he doesn't just make up stories or sensationalize stories to get hits on his website. He truly believes that in the long run, if you're accurate, people are going to believe what you say, and they're going to come back for more. So that's really what we've been trying to do on the site. Sometimes less is more. We focus more on quality rather than quantity. We may not have as many stories as other sites, but when you come to us, you know that you can trust it, that it's going to be accurate. We're growing on our English page. I have two great colleagues helping me out. I have Enrico Passarella in Italy. You can follow him at Guardaline, and we just brought on Serena Perfetto, who I've worked with in the past, and she's from Bari and lives in San Francisco. So we're growing the page. We're going to bring more original content, but at the end of the day, the meat and potatoes of what we do is the transfer news that Gianluca brings, and we're just going to keep doing more of it. We definitely appreciate the support of all your listeners.
And what I appreciate is your honesty, David. You're pure, you're passionate, and you don't get into stupid Twitter fights, and you don't get into BSing people. You're just a guy that cares about the game and giving out the goods and making sure we're all alert of who's moving from which club to which club, and all the great news with Gianluca Di Marzio. And that's what you do, and it's outstanding of you to join us once again, David. Keep up the great work, and we'll get you back on in the not-too-distant long future, my friend.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to talk to you, and have a great evening. And thank you to all your listeners as well.